I am writing this by candlelight in the village of Garuda Kempanahally, as my first experience of a PRA exercise is nearing its completion. It is being organized by an NGO group, Myrada, which has a development project here, to begin the process of developing an integrated plan for the watershed in partnership with the village community. There are about 20 of us, mainly members of the project team, and a few of us from other agencies who have come to learn about the PRA approach and PRA methods. But let me tell you what has been happening. Garuda Kempanahally is a small village in South Karnataka, off the state highway, off the district roads, and onto a mud track, the kind of place that rarely sees a visitor. We arrived in the village late in the afternoon. The first item on the program was a kind of warm-up exercise. It is called Do It Yourself, which we did, with a lot of guidance and encouragement from the villagers. All the members of the PRA team were set to try our hands at doing routine village tasks. Digging manure, washing clothes, chopping firewood, things like that. Our rather clumsy and amusing efforts worked as an icebreaker, but also as an equalizer between the village people and us. This is how a village farmer plows a field, and this is how I did. The do-it-yourself game gave me a first-hand experience of how much skill goes into the simplest task and how little we know of village skills. I came here with the feeling that we would teach the villagers about watershed management and that PRA is a good strategy to get their cooperation. I suddenly realized that we had a lot to learn from them. One thing that has excited me is the quality of information which has been generated by relatively short exercises, using the simplest of materials, sticks and stones, beans and seeds. One such exercise is seasonality diagramming. In the first stage, we use stones to mark out the 12 months of our calendar year, and then to relate this to the people's calendar, using the main festivals as coordination points. We know that Ugadi comes in March or Dasara in October, and so on, so our time frames could be matched. The next task was to chart the rainfall pattern in the area, month by month, using sticks of different lengths to show the quantity of rain. In a quarter of an hour, we had a bar graph of the local rainfall pattern. Of course, it wouldn't be precise enough for a meteorologist to use, but that doesn't matter. We only need a working basis to understand how the seasonal pattern of rainfall affects the rhythm of life in the village. Using nuts and seeds, we were also able to quantify the number of days of men's labor and women's labor, month by month. There are different seasonal patterns of employment for men and women. And yet, how rarely we take this into consideration when scheduling activities which need the labor of the community. In a similar seasonality exercise, another group studied the relationship between the pattern of income and expenditure. to identify critical periods when credit is in short supply. The whole process of seasonality diagramming is completely visual. Everybody can see what is being discussed. Everybody can join in the discussion. We use the visual principle in cataloging the resources of the watershed by making maps on paper and on the ground. On the morning of the second day, a group of villagers and team members built a model of the watershed in the shade of a tree. Meanwhile, 3 other groups did a walking transect of the watershed, looking at things and talking to people on the way, with the farmers as guides. One transect route was designed to pass through the agricultural area, through the tank, and up the slope to the upper catchment, to study the status of the environment and local vegetation. By climbing to the highest point of the watershed, we were able to get an integrated view of the local geography. It's a semi-arid area with some good farming land. The upper catchment, which is largely deforested and is rapidly being eroded, drains into a tank, below which are the irrigated fields. In the center of the watershed is the village, a small community of about 60 families. A second group, which did the tank transect, followed the nullas which feed the tank to classify them according to the quantity of water and soil or silt which they carry. Just walking around and looking uncovers a lot of information. Talking to people on the way provides new insights. For instance, the fact that while silting reduces the holding capacity of the tank, it also provides clay for brick making, and sand, which can be sold as a construction material. A third group covered the other end of the watershed, studying local systems of soil and water management, drainage, erosion, agricultural methods, and the productivity of the land. In the seemingly bare scrubland of the upper catchment, there is an amazing variety of plants. Within a small area, about the size of a room, the farmer showed us 12 different species, and they use every one of them. There was something for cooling the system, a kind of flower which stops diarrhea, something else for treating minor fractures and sprains in cattle. There's even a kind of berry which they use as an early indicator of the monsoon. If the crop is good, this is an early indication of a good monsoon, and vice versa. In the fields lower down, there is a sort of aromatic weed which is actually used to repel pests from stored grain. Very interesting indeed to see how much the people are in harmony with their environment. One tends to overlook the fact that if a farming community has lived in an area for generations, they would have developed their own management systems. And we need to understand these before tampering with them. By the time we returned from the transect, the map model was complete. The map model showed the whole watershed, land use, drainage, vegetation, and other resources, from the upper catchment to the farming land and the village itself. The villagers are very particular about accuracy of detail. Whether it is the exact species of tree growing in the upper catchment or the irrigation system from the tank. Having studied the area during the transect, we were able to understand and even question details of the map from our own personal observations. The discussion around the model also helped the villagers to understand the idea of their watershed as a single unit and the need for an integrated approach to planning. Later in the evening, we all assembled for a group meeting. Information we had gathered was presented and discussed. We started focusing on major issues and how they were to be treated. The meeting decided that it would be important to reforest the upper catchment to minimize the process of erosion and silting of the tank. The proposal for reforestation led to an interesting new exercise, a matrix ranking of local trees to understand their uses and relative importance for the villagers. We listed the 6 most important trees and then started ranking them, taking 2 at a time. Later, leaves of each tree were placed under the stones for easier identification. The different uses of trees were listed. And what is the value of each tree for each end use? This was represented by putting small stones on a scale of 0 to 5. The final matrix, which took about 45 minutes to create, gave an organized picture of major local species. And their uses, as described by the local community. The matrix information is being used as an input to decide the mix of species for the reforestry plan. At the end of the second day, I felt we had a very clear idea of the watershed and its resources. When the third day's exercises began, I realized that I had no real idea of life in the village itself, its social groups, its institutions. This day's exercises were directed at understanding people, a kind of social mapping. One group makes a timeline chart, a sort of outline history of the village, by interviewing an old man. Another group discussed patterns of change in customs and practices. One group did an exercise in Venn diagramming, or chapati diagrams as they call it, because people and institutions are represented by paper cutouts which look like chapatis. The Venn diagram is a kind of social map which depicts the social environment of the village, indicating the importance of an institution by the size of the circle and the nature of the relationship by the distance of the circles from the center. We also studied non-farming livelihoods, which in Garuda Kempanahally include goat and sheep rearing, basket making, leaf plates, bricks, and agricultural implements. It is necessary to provide for the resources which support these livelihoods in the integrated plan. The discussion group, which was to do wealth ranking, decided instead to do it as a pictorial economic survey on the village map. They used different colors for houses to represent 4 economic categories, from rich to poor. As the exercise developed, the group listed main assets pictorially: a brown patch for dry land, green for wet land, stick figures for cattle, a symbol for bullock carts, and so on. I thought wealth ranking would be a sensitive area, but surprisingly, it did not arouse much controversy in the lively group discussion which followed. Only one household had to be recolored because a group meeting decided that the household in question had been wrongly classified. The wealth ranking information will help to create a focus towards the needs of the poor and landless people when development plans are made. I'm fascinated by the potential of this kind of mapping exercise to identify beneficiaries for IRDP loans or child sponsorship programs, to get information on health status, educational status, and so on. An endless list of possibilities. During the discussions, I was struck by the informality and openness of the groups. It was quite a contrast to the way we often approach villagers, deciding what they need and lecturing them on what they should do. As this PRA exercise is nearing its completion, I can see that the real work is only just beginning. New questions have been asked. New expectations have been raised. And for the first time, the people of Garuda Kempanahally have been given a chance to shape the future of their own habitat, according to their own priorities and perceptions. Now the PRA process will have to continue, with this kind of joint approach to decision-making and problem-solving being used to monitor the development of the watershed as it happens. But as of now, the uppermost impression in my mind is the warm feeling that I've been accepted as an insider by the village. So I shall sign off and rejoin the rest of the group in our last evening's get-together.